Hello, my dear listeners, and welcome back aboard the Paranormal Express. I hope you've come prepared for tonight's... I can't think of a word. Events. Sure. Anyway, what I have for you today is, as you can probably tell if you're watching this on YouTube, is the Humanoid Encounters Iceberg. I came across this just on Reddit. I kind of got the idea to do an iceberg. I've just seen those around, over the years, as you do. And I just thought it would be kind of interesting to cover one. It would probably expose me to things I may not normally research or find, or know about already. Tier 1, of course, as icebergs work, is going to be, pretty more general stuff. Although there was one thing that I hadn't heard of before, but it's a pretty simple figure. It's nothing too extreme, or odd, I guess. But yeah, hopefully you will enjoy. The iceberg in particular, as I said, is called the Humanoid Encounters Iceberg. The person who made the iceberg, or compiled it, whatever, is named Semydeus, Semydeus. I keep saying I hate that I'm aware of it, because then it's just gonna make it worse each time that I say But yes. So, the first item, if you will, on this, I keep wanting to call it a tier list, on this iceberg, is the Greys. Typical aliens. They're often the subject of close encounters. I believe I don't know if you ever see them, but I believe they're the subject of the movie The Fourth Kind, which I believe takes place in Alaska. I'm trying to remember the name of the town. I can't remember the name of the town, but I believe that takes place in Alaska. I didn't write anything about that. That just came to my mind right now when I was talking about it. Because sometimes when it's especially these more popular or well-known ones, I like to try and attach them to some media or pop culture thing that they're a part of. Like, for Greys specifically, I mean, you probably know what they look like, but like I said, they're your typical, aliens standing about, 4 feet tall, very thin, and, kind of lanky limbs despite their short stature, typically, at least when they're depicted. Gray skin, obviously, hence the name Greys. They're usually pretty, almost malnourished looking, like their skin is just very tight and almost gaunt. Although they're their heads are big and bulbous, if you will. They have also these big bulging black eyes usually that are keep trying to think of a shape to them. Typically it's I want to say almond, but big almond. If you've seen American Dad, getting back to pop culture connections, I suppose, if you've seen American Dad, the character Roger, though I don't think he has the typical eyes of a gray alien, but he is a gray alien. They're also the subject of, which I'll get into that as I talk more about this figure in a few moments. They're the antagonist, I suppose, of the Mothership Zeta DLC for Fallout 3. But yeah, so let's talk into what Greys are, or what their story is. I don't know how to call that, really. Either way, I've talked about other aliens on the podcast before, and I'll reference one of those in a minute here, just when it comes up to being important, and a few other things on this list. Like I said, Greys are a typical subject for abductions, alien abductions, and paranormal encounters in general. The term, or the idea of gray aliens was popularized by the incident involving the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. Their story is that they were a specifically interracial couple during a height when it was not as accepted or okay, I guess, as it is today. Yeah, which is why I think Barney didn't talk about this as much as Betty did. Because Betty is the subject of basically all the articles I could find on the subject. Whereas Barney, I don't think I ever saw him talk about it too much, if ever. And when he did, I don't think he really didn't say anything of importance. Maybe because he wanted to keep out of the limelight. And maybe that was a personal preference. Maybe that had something to do with the racial tension during the civil rights movement. I don't know why. But either way, that's not really important for discussing the Greys. But like I said, Barney didn't talk about it too much from what I found, but Betty did. She talked about it a lot. So she made like a lot of like notes, recordings, writings, and interviews and whatnot, whatever. I was mostly, when I wrote all that, I was just trying to think of words for things you can create when you're talking about a thing. But whatever. She was interviewed by some ufologists, and during these interviews she was put under hypnosis, and I think during one of these interviews, and maybe it was a different one, but I believe it was one when she was under hypnosis, she drew a map, and later, or at the same time, I'm not sure exactly the timeline of events for this, but I think it was later, a woman named Marjorie Fish created a model based on the drawing that Betty provided, which was concluded to have been the star system Zeta Reticuli, and supposedly that is the claimed homeworld for the aliens that abducted Barney and Betty. I guess some notes about Zeta Reticuli. It's a binary system. The stars are main sequence, where they actually believe that they were slightly lower in luminosity, so they were like dimmer than our sun. For any of you that don't know, main sequence just means that it's a typical star like our sun, because our sun is one of the most common types of stars. And, Zeta Reticuli can also be viewed from the southern hemisphere. Something else I'd like to note, though, just because I like astronomy, I think it's fun, interesting, whatever. Zeta Reticuli currently have no known planets, at least according to people who have observed them for, long periods of time. At one point, they did think that there was like a debris disk around one of the stars, or both, or something, from like a nebula or whatnot. But in 2017, it was concluded that this was incorrect and likely just some misconstruing of something on the infrared from the telescope they were using. But yeah, that's basically it for these specific aliens. But something similar, and kind of ties into this a little bit because of how the origin of the phrase. I've talked about it on the podcast before, but the origin of the phrase "little green men." It's, of course, very tied to alien encounters and ufology, UFOs, whatever. It's probably my favorite depiction of aliens, just because I think they look more interesting or fun, even though they're absolutely horrifying, no matter what, whether their skin is gray or green. But either way, that is the subject of the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, which I believe I did talk about on a previous podcast episode. But that took place in, I want to say, Christian County, Kentucky. I know it was Kentucky, between the towns of Kelly and Hopkinsville. I just can't remember if they were in Christian County. I think it was. But the basic events was that a family had a sort of like reunion. I don't think it was like a formal family reunion. It was just kind of this woman's kids and their kids got together at the farmhouse and just kind of had to get together. At one point in the evening, after I think a few of the kids went to bed, maybe not all of them, some of the older ones might have been up. They're not really important to this subject, but they're just, a part of it. The adults, like some of her sons, and I believe the daughter and the mother were all having a card game. They were playing card games, and one of them decided, I'm thirsty, I'm gonna go outside and get some water from the well. Because, that's what you had to do back then. As he went out, I believe they also had a friend there, and it might have been him who did this, but either way, I digress. One of the adults went out, and on the tree line, saw a weird little creature. A goblin. As, because it's called like the Hopkinsville Goblin or something like that. I believe it's Hopkinsville that got that name. Because they have a few different names for it, because of the location. And I believe it's the Hopkinsville Goblin is what it's sometimes referred to as. But yes, so they saw this creature, or this adult, this person saw this creature on the tree line and got spooked and was like, I don't know what that thing is. I'm gonna go get my gun and shoot it because they're American. I don't know. They did that anyway. They decided to shoot at it because they were worried. I believe there is at least one account that I could find of the mother being like, wait a minute, what if it's someone who just looks weird in the dark and needs help or something? And was trying to talk some sense into them, who were just firing wildly at the tree line. But eventually I think she saw the creature herself and was spooked by it, so they continued shooting. Until eventually all of their attempts to shoot it failed, and they fled the farmhouse to the town to get assistance from the police. So at like midnight, 1 a.m. or so, like 7 people, like all the kids, they got all the kids in the cars or whatever they were driving it then. I don't think this was that long ago. They got all the kids in the cars, they drove off into town, got to the sheriff's office, and all of them went in and started, I guess, I imagine they all just went up to this man's desk and were just yelling at him, not like in an angry way, but in a like frightened manner. And it's just like, it's a lot to take in when, you know, you have like 7 or 8 people come in and just start yelling at you. You're like, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on? So yeah, I believe that that's essentially what happened. Following hearing their story about the creature on the tree line, the police would go with the family back to the farmhouse and investigate a bit. In doing so, or at some point, the media became aware of it. The media, TM, became aware of it, and also, like, encroached on the farm, trying to get, you know, any sort of news, I guess they could out of this. And I believe the media, it could have been the police officer in the report. I can't remember exactly, and I couldn't find who coined this exactly. I've heard it before, I couldn't find that, or anything saying who coined the term little green men, because the mother, the grandmother, whatever you want to call her, I forget her name right now, because I didn't actually write anything down in my notes about this. I just was like, you know it. I will look that up really quick because I feel like that's a little bit important. Is her name not on here? It's gotta be on here. Maybe it's not. That's crazy. I actually can't find their name. Huh. Either way, oh well. Their name is not on just the Wikipedia page for it, which I thought, you know, something that basic would be. But oh well. Oh yeah, so the other names that I was talking about before is Hopkinsville Goblin Case and Kelly Green Man Case. Not to be confused with the Green Man from Europe. He's different. That was also, I think, the subject of an A24 film. Yeah, I couldn't find their names just looking over this. I thought that would be in here, but it's not. At least not obviously. Oh wait, no, there's some names. Elmer Sutton, Billy Ray Taylor. So I guess those were 2 of the adults who were firing at the creature on the tree line. But either way, yeah, they when their mother, or the mother of this family, was recounting what she had seen and what her sons had saw, she, I believe, claimed that it had gray skin, following, you know, into the grays, but someone, either the media or that police officer, filed it as little green men. Because they were small. They were likely because they were owls, but, you know. They were small. I mean, aliens typically are small, at least in depictions and when people talk about them. Because I think earlier I said they were like, 4 feet tall usually? I'm just giving general explanations. That's not like they're always 4 feet tall. No, they're, you know, it can differ. But yeah, that's the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter, which is how the Greys turned into the Greens, Little Green Men. I think that one's really interesting, and I love the name, the Hopkinsville Goblin. I just think that's fun. And it was Christian County, I was correct. Cool. And it was August 21st, 1955. The only names I could find, though, are Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor. Okay. Oh well. But yeah, I digress. So that ends our first entry? Yeah, first entry into the iceberg. And now The second one is also, of course, very common. All these are going to be pretty common. I'll mention the one that I didn't know is later. It's towards the end of the list, but it's pretty short. There isn't a whole lot to it. I could probably sum that one up in a sentence if I wanted to. So the second one is, you know him, you love him, the man with big feet, Bigfoot. I wrote here in my notes, the Ape Boy Supreme, although the famous picture/video of it is said to have been female, which I forget what that film's called. I could look that up really quick, because it's right on the Wikipedia page, because I looked at it before. I just didn't write that down, because it's not that big a deal. It's frame 352 of of the 1967. Okay, I thought that was the total amount of frames. No, it's frame 352 of the 1967 Patterson-Gimlin film, which is, very well known. Most people who have any interest in Bigfoot would have seen this before, but yeah, it's very well known, I guess. I don't know. I'm just repeating myself now. But of course, even though Bigfoot's so well known, I'll still go over it, just because I never really have on here, I don't think, before. And, I mean, there's some interesting stories with Bigfoot, at least, but it's a pretty simple figure to wrap your head around, I think. So, one, it's also referred to as the Sasquatch, which the word Sasquatch is possibly, and I this is what you're going to find if you start looking into folklore a lot, is that etymology of, names and things like that is often contested. So, while I say something means something, well, if I say something means something, it probably does, but, because usually if it's, contested, or it's, argued, or it's questioned, I'll say that it is. So, the Bigfoot is also referred to as the Sasquatch, which is how I think I first learned about him back in, I don't know when those... I used to see these commercials on TV for, I believe it was Jack's Links, the beef jerky. And they had a Sasquatch as their mascot for some reason. And I just remember those commercials. I remember the Sasquatch vividly. I don't remember any specific commercial that vividly. I believe I remember him, running out of the woods, screaming and scaring off people, and then eating their jerky. But yeah, that's my introduction to Bigfoot. I believe, anyway. That or some, Scooby-Doo thing. I don't know. That's probably more so the Yeti, which I believe is coming up. But yeah, it means Sasquatch, and it's referred to as the Sasquatch. And Sasquatch, the word, is possibly an anglicized version of the word, and I might butcher this, but Saskets? Or Saskets? I don't know. It's a Native American word, specifically and I also might butcher this, but the Halkomelem language of the First Nation people of British Columbia. I apologize if I did mispronounce anything like that. The word means hairy man, as far as I could find. I didn't find anything contested about that. So, besides what I've already said about Jack's Links, or the beef jerky ads as a child, besides that, what I know about Bigfoot is that it's essentially a North American version of the European wild man, or at least those myths carried over when European colonialists, colonists, whatever, would have come, or even immigrants, depending on the time period, because we're going to get into a story of, I believe, an immigrant who was a frontiersman. But yeah, it connects to the European wild man, I mentioned him previously, but the Green Man, which is another sort of nature, spirit, creature, possibly god, whatever. It's also connected to the idea of the Faun or the Satyr, mostly in them being spirits or representations of nature, rather than, looking like it or anything like that, or necessarily embodying certain things that, the Satyr embodies. Because the Satyr embodies a lot of non-nature things, such as, drunkenness and whatnot. But yeah, I digress. In the modern age, I think a lot of people see Bigfoot as less of a representation of, nature and just some kind of ape or undocumented species that hasn't been found yet. And my favorite stories about the time of the Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, is what Teddy Roosevelt referred to as a goblin story. He wrote about someone being hunted. It wasn't himself. Originally, when I first heard it, I believe it was proposed as though he had done that, and I don't know if that person just misunderstood the story or what, because this is the only time I think he really ever wrote about something supernatural like this, but I could be wrong. It's pretty much the only time I could find of him talking about Bigfoot, or what is believed to be Bigfoot, because he doesn't refer to it as Sasquatch or Bigfoot or anything like that. But he wrote about someone a frontiersman from Germany, I believe, or at least he has German ancestry, that's stated in the story. He wrote about this man being hunted by Bigfoot, and I will read that story now. It comes from The Wilderness Hunter from 1892, but the excerpt I found is from, I believe, a collection that was reproduced in like 1997 or something like that, or 1977, called that one's called The Memories of the Frontier, or sorry, Memories of the American Frontier. And I will read that now. Frontiersmen are not, as a rule, apt to be very superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and these few were of a perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But I once listened to a goblin story, which rather impressed me. It was told by a grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bowman, who was born and had passed all his life on the frontier. So I guess he wasn't an immigrant himself. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghost and goblin lore. So that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps of the snow walkers and the specters and the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. And it may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time and still more in remembrance, weird and elfin traits to what was merely some abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. So, I just want to make a comment here. So, Teddy mentions, like, goblin lore and all these, like, different folkloric or mythological or religious, I guess you could say, but not in, like, I don't know, we have a very Christian-centric, I think, view of it in America today. But a lot of these, like, stories of creatures and things that plague the wilderness or plague on humans, so I want to know what he thinks these things, not like an actual explanation for what they are, but what his explanation, or not explanation, that's the wrong word, what his understanding of these things would be. I want to know what Teddy Roosevelt thought a goblin was, or what an elf was. And I mean, I guess I can kind of get an idea by reading some of those older stories. I don't know, I just think that's interesting, or would be interesting. When the event occurred, Bowman was still a young man, and was trapping with a partner among the mountains dividing the forks of the Salmon from the head of the Wisdom River. Not having had much luck, he and his partner determined to go up into a particularly wild and lonely pass through which ran a small stream said to contain many beaver. The pass had an evil reputation, because the year before, a solitary hunter who had wandered into it was there slain. I almost said was slain there. Seemingly by a wild beast. The half-eaten remains being afterwards found by some mining prospectors who had passed his camp only the night before. So it's strange that, like, you know, the frontier is understood to be, or it's strange to me anyway, that the frontier is understood to be like this lonely, dangerous, desolate place, you know, full of, I guess desolate's probably not the right term because there's a lot of life there. But this like dangerous and wild place where like you could, like you're living on like the edge, you could die at any moment to some wild beast. But he still calls it, this place, evil rather than dangerous or something like that. I wonder why he chose to put the word evil there, or why they would have thought of it as evil. Like, I understand, of course, this hunter was killed by probably a bear or a wolf or something. But why would that give it an evil reputation? Surely that happens all over, or at least it's understood that it could happen anywhere. Out in the wild, maybe not anywhere, because, I mean, there are certain places where those animals don't really roam. But either way, I digress, I guess. The memory of this event, however, weighed very lightly with the two trappers, who were as adventurous and hardy as others of their kind. They took their two lean mountain ponies to the foot of the pass, where they left them in an open beaver meadow, the rocky timber-clad ground being from there thence onwards impractical. Sorry, because I like this word he uses, and I've never seen it before, but impracticable for horses. They then struck out on foot through the vast, gloomy forest, and in about 4 hours reached a little open glade where they concluded to camp, as signs of game were plenty. There was still an hour or two of daylight left after building a brush lean-to and throwing down and opening their packs. They started upstream. The country was very dense and hard to travel through, as there was much down timber, although, here and there, the somber woodland was broken by small glades of mountain grass. At dusk, they again reached camp. The glade in which it was pitched was not many yards wide, and the tall, close-set pines and firs rising round it like a wall. On one side was a little stream, beyond which rose the steep mountain slopes, covered with the unbroken growth of the evergreen forest. They were surprised to find that during their short absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited camp, and had rummaged about among their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in sheer wantonness destroying their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting the fire. While Bowman was making ready supper, it already being dark, his companion began to examine the tracks more closely, and soon took a brand from the fire to follow them. Where the intruder had walked along the game trail after leaving camp, when the brand flickered out, he returned and took another, repeating his inspection of the footprints very closely. Coming back to the fire, he stood by it a minute or two, peering out into the darkness, and suddenly remarked, "Bowman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." Bowman laughed at this, but his partner insisted that he was right, and upon again examining the tracks with the torch, they certainly did seem to be made by but 2 paws, or feet. However, it was too dark to make sure. After discussing whether the footprints could possibly be those of a human being, and coming to the conclusion that they could not be, the 2 men rolled up their blankets and went to sleep under their lean-to. At midnight, Bowman was awakened by some noise and sat up in his blankets. As he did, so his nostrils were struck by a strong, wild beast odor, and he caught the loom of a great body in the darkness at the mouth of the lean-to. Grasping his rifle, he fired at the vague, threatening shadow, but must have missed, for immediately afterwards he heard the smashing of the underwood as the thing, whatever it was, rushed off into the impenetrable blackness of the forest and the night. After this, the 2 men slept but little, sitting up by the rekindled fire, but they heard nothing more. In the morning, they started out to look at the few traps they had set the previous evening and to put out a few new ones. By an unspoken agreement, they kept together all day and returned to the camp towards evening. On nearing it, they saw, hardly to their astonishment, that the lean-to had again been torn down, The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and in wanton malice had tossed about their camp kit and bedding and destroyed the shanty. The ground was marked up by its tracks, and on leaving the camp, it had gone along the soft earth by the brook, where the footprints were as plain as if on snow. And after careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if, whatever the thing was, it had walked off on but 2 legs. The men, thoroughly uneasy, gathered a heap of dead logs and kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one or the other sitting guard most of the time. About midnight, the thing came down through the forest opposite across the brook and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh, grating, long-drawn moan, a particularly sinister sound, yet it did not venture near the fire. In the morning, the 2 trappers, after discussing the strange events of the last 36 hours, decided that they would shoulder their packs and leave the valley that afternoon. They were the more ready to do this because, in spite of seeing a good deal of game sign, they had caught very little fur. However, it was necessary first to go along their line of their traps and gather them, and this they started out to do. All morning they kept together, picking up trap after trap, each one empty. On first leaving camp, they had the disagreeable sensation of being followed. In the dense spruce thickets, they occasionally heard a branch snap after they had passed, and now and then there were slight rustling noises among the small pines to one side of them. At noon, they were back within a couple miles of camp. In the high, bright sunlight, their fears seemed absurd to the 2 men, accustomed as they were, through long years of lonely wandering in the wilderness, to face every kind of danger from man, brute, or element. There were still 3 beaver traps to collect from the little pond in a wide ravine nearby. Bowman volunteered to gather these and bring them in, while his companion went ahead to camp and made ready the packs. They have just made a grave mistake, as I'm sure anyone who is a fan of horror would know. They split up, as Fred would say. They split up and looked for traps, apparently. On reaching the pond, Bowman found 3 beaver in the traps, one of which had been pulled loose and carried into a beaver house. He took several hours in securing and preparing the beaver, and when he started homewards, he marked with some uneasiness how low the sun was getting. As he hurried towards camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed on him. His feet made no sound on the pine needles, and slanting sun rays striking through among the straight trunks made a gray twilight in which objects at a distance glimmered indistinctly. There was nothing to break the ghostly stillness which, when there is no breeze, always broods over these somber primeval forests. At last, he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out, though the thin blue smoke was still curling upwards. Near it lay the packs, wrapped and arranged. At first Bowman could see nobody, nor did he receive an answer to his call. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did, so his eyes fell on the body of his friend, stretched beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing towards it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but the neck was broken, while there were 4 great fang marks in the throat. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his unpacking, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods to wait for his companion. While thus waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking nearby in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly still on two legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its forepaws, while it buried its teeth in his throat. It had not eaten the body, but apparently had romped and gamboled round it in uncouth, ferocious glee, occasionally rolling over and over it, and had then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Bowman, utterly unnerved and believing that the creature with which he had to deal was something either half human or half devil, some great goblin beast, abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onwards through the night until far beyond the reach of pursuit. And thus ends that story of Bowman and his unnamed friend. Again, that was written by Teddy Roosevelt. Which president was he? He was a president, obviously, but which president was he? So there's a lot of information, of course, on Bigfoot, so there's a lot more that I could potentially cover with it. I mean, there's probably whole podcasts about Bigfoot, honestly. I know there's like whole games and stuff where you can get like hunted by him, or you can try and get photographs of him and stuff like that, which I think is kind of funny. But yeah, one last thing I'd like to say about it, just because I thought it was kind of funny about Bigfoot, is that while doing research for this, I found that the owner of the Bigfoot Discovery Museum claims to have smelled Bigfoot. And there was a quote about it. I don't know why. Given the chance to see and meet Bigfoot, why would you smell him? And I mean, I can understand if it's just pervasive, but I don't know. Maybe it just was. Anyway, here's what he said about it. Imagine a skunk that had rolled around in dead animals and had hung around the garbage pits. And with that, the entry of Bigfoot comes to an end. There is, of course, more, as I said, on Bigfoot that I could cover at some other point. But I believe for the purpose of this is enough. I just went over some things that I personally enjoy about the creature that I think are interesting. Hello, my dear listeners. I hope you've been enjoying your time aboard the Paranormal Express this evening. I've interrupted the show to bring you some exciting news. As I will mention at the end of this episode, I've created a Patreon for my two podcasts. Of course, the Paranormal Express, which you are listening to now, and my other podcast, The Spellbound Soiree. This show follows a radio host in a fantasy world of my own imagination. If you wish to know more, you can tune in to that show. But I digress. On the Patreon, you'll be able to support me and receive some great benefits, such as a member shout-out at the end of episodes, access to a special role on Discord, Patreon-only live streams, and more. I'm also planning to add some digital items to the shop. I'm still working out the details, but I'll be sure to let you know when they're available. I'd like to emphasize that supporting the Patreon is entirely optional. The bulk of both my shows will always be free. I simply wanted to offer something valuable for those who might be interested in supporting me. Thank you for the continued support of any kind, and now, let's get back to the show. Welcome back, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. You're listening to the Paranormal Express. Say welcome back, it's probably not really even been like a second for you. I just had to take a break. But yeah, so we just finished talking about Bigfoot, and now I'm going to move on to the next entry on the Humanoid Encounters Iceberg, Ashtar Sharan. This is sort of an entry that I didn't know a whole lot about. I've heard the name Ashtar Sharan before, but that's about it. I didn't know a whole lot about him. To put it simply, Ashtar Sharan seems to be some sort of extraterrestrial being. basically an alien. A lot of people have claimed to receive messages or like communications from him. That's essentially it. That would be like the synopsis of it. I'm not entirely sure about this part, but he seems to play some sort of role in like a religion based around extraterrestrial life and UFOs or UFO sightings. From what I've gathered, the religion basically follows that as we discover more about alien cultures or extraterrestrial beings' cultures and their technology and whatnot, we will start to solve a lot of the issues that plague our society, such as bigotry, war, greed, stuff like that. But back to Charon, the star of the show. In 1952, except it's not actually about Charon now, it's about this dude. In 1952, the first person to claim to receive communications from Charon was George Wellington Van Tassel. And Van Tassel, at the time, also interpreted, I believe he was a follower of this movement with the UFO sightings, or this religious group. He believes basically that Jesus and a lot of biblical figures, well, I think specifically Jesus, I don't think many of the others are thought to be he believed Jesus was an extraterrestrial being. I don't know why I'm tiptoeing around it. He also claimed that he had the power to tap into the universal mind of God, whatever that is. He also claimed that every human has that power or that potential. They just don't know how to do it, I guess. I don't know. But using this power, he could receive messages from Charon, but also other people. So you might think that like, oh, this is gonna lead into like some sort of like alien council or like big extraterrestrial like government type thing. And I mean, we'll kind of get into that a little bit. I don't know a whole lot about that part, but it's mentioned at least. But Van Tassel claims that this ability allows him to speak with the dead, specifically Nikola Tesla. And what did Tesla tell him? He told him how to build a building called the Integratron. Don't know why, but he did. But yeah, if you're like me, you have no clue what the Integratron is. Or I didn't anyway. I do now. But yeah, the Integratron is, it's interesting, I guess. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't really understand why. just why. Well, I get some of the why. So essentially, the Integratron is a building with like really good acoustics, apparently. Anyway, it's a building that's capable of rejuvenation, anti-gravity, and time travel. So what the hell is this thing? I still have no clue, besides the fact of what I just said, basically. It's a building. How does it work, though? I know what they say for how it's supposed to work. Or what, by they, I mean Van Tassel, I think. I don't know if he's the one who wrote this necessarily, but I believe this is what he claimed. Or what he claimed of how it worked. So according to what I found, supposedly it harnesses magnetic fields in order to generate plasma and negative air ionization, in quotes. The reason for this is that Van Tassel claimed and speculated that electromagnetism could alter biological cells. I have no clue if there's any truth to that or not. But yeah, he thought that it could, I guess, rejuvenate people, at the very least. I still have no idea how that plays into anti-gravity or time travel, but maybe that has something to do with the fact that he claims it was built on a geomagnetic anomaly. I don't know what that necessarily means, but it's what he said. It's what he claimed. After his death, there was discussion on what should be done with the Integratron. There was a proposal to turn it into a disco, I guess because of the good acoustics, or maybe they just wanted that. Where actually is the Integratron? I know it's in the middle of the desert, but where exactly? Because I didn't write that down from when I was researching this. Also, if you want to know how to spell it, think integration, but not. But no I guess. Or I guess it's an R instead. Integratron. It's in California, okay. Homestead Valley, California. I thought it might be in like Colorado or something. Yeah, they were discussing on what to do with the building. There was discussion on what to do with it, about making it a disco or something. My money was on a roller rink. Except I don't think that was ever actually brought up, and I don't think it actually would be good for that. I'm not sure how big the building is, but their current owners use at least like a main room for something they call a sound bath, in which in that room is a bunch of like mattresses laid out that I suppose guests and patrons would lay down on and then be bathed by sound from the acoustic bowls that they would like, I guess, play or whatever.
Future host here. I'm not sure why I referred to the bowls in the Integratron as acoustic bowls. They were quartz bowls. I just wanted to come back here and correct myself, so yeah. Anyway, hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
I don't know what that would be called. Where you like rim with like the stone? I don't know. But yeah, in 2018, the building was added to the NRHP, National Register of Historic Places. And also another thing about it, if you're a fan, like I mentioned, good acoustic, if you're a fan of the Arctic Monkeys, in 2008, they recorded part of their song Secret Door here. So back to Van Tassel, though, a little bit, before 2018 when all that happened. So Van Tassel would hold these, like, weekly sessions at a place called Giant Rock. And at these, like, sessions, he would essentially hold, like, a Q&A, or an AMA, a Reddit AMA at Giant Rock, where people would, like, ask him questions about the state of the world and whatnot, and what Ashtar Sharan could do about it or something, I guess. Or pleas to the world of what to do about the state of the world. And keep in mind, of course, this is in 1952 or so. So, like, the height of the Red Scare and the Cold War, or the beginning of the Cold War, the height of, like, the Red Scare, McCarthyism. And a lot of his, like, early claims from Ashtar Sharan come from these, like, initial meetings. Specifically, they were about a hydrogen bomb that the U.S. was they're about a hydrogen bomb that the U.S. was testing. And, of course, this is also in the wake of World War II, so the people are still a little wary of, like, the nuclear bombs that were first deployed during that war, at the end of that war. So there's just a lot of, like, hesitancy, worry, and apprehension, just, a state of fear, essentially, from all of this. It just culminates in strange times. So, yeah, but what did Van Tassel or Ashtar say about the hydrogen bomb? He basically said that it would destroy the world if they went ahead with testing it. Well, the bomb was tested. And I mean, we're still here. So, what happened? Well, lucky for us, Ashtar Galactic Command and their space forces were there to protect the planet to make sure it survived. Why? I have no clue. Why are we important? I don't know. Anyway, that's what Van Tassel would claim after the bomb was tested and did go off and the planet did not get destroyed. That's pretty much it for Ashtar and stuff. But if you're confused about Giant Rock, it's not just some random rock in the desert. It's a specific rock, big rock, in the Mojave Desert. And it just, when I was looking up about Giant Rock, because I was just confused, I was like, where is this? What is this? It's literally just a giant rock in the Mojave Desert. But sadly, I don't think it's in Fallout New Vegas. But it did also remind me of that, like, tweet from a couple years back, or a while back, I can't remember how long ago it was, from the San Miguel sheriff saying, I believe the original tweet was, I can look it up, actually. I believe it was, like, a large boulder the size of a small boulder. But yeah, that's pretty much it for Sharan and all that. So now, let's move on to the next entry in the iceberg. I talked before about satyrs and fauns, and how they are, like, spirits of nature and whatnot. This one is not a spirit of nature necessarily, but it is a goat man. Specifically, the Maryland goat man is what I'm going to be talking about here. There are various goat men from around the country. One I found in a book I have is the Maine goat man. And I think that book has other ones about other various goat men from around the country. But the one I'm going to talk about is the Maryland Goatman, because that's the one I was most aware of. So in 1971, a student by the name of George Lizama finished his undergrad folklore project on the Goatman. In his paper, the Goatman was said to be sighted around Tucker Road in Clinton, Maryland. And of course, he just wrote about how, well, I don't know actually what he wrote about because I couldn't find his paper, but I assume he wrote about the generic, story of, like, the monster preying on random citizens and people. Stalking kids at Lover's Lane and stuff like that. Anyway, but the one thing I found of note of it is that he said it would stalk around Tucker Road in Clinton, Maryland, which is different from another person who wrote about this a little while later in the same year, though. I believe he wrote his paper in May of 1971, and then Karen Hosler, who's a reporter, talked about or wrote about the figure in October of 1971. She reported on it. In her report, she would claim that the Goatman could be sighted near Fletchertown Road in Bowie, Maryland, which is, different. But of course, it's still all largely the same, that, it's a monster that goes around and kills people. And the reason why this became, and we'll get into that not a little bit more, it's mentioned by a folklorist from the nearby University of Maryland called Barry Pearson. And he claims that the Goatman is a legend of old, but popularized in 1971 due to the death or disappearance of a few dogs in the area. I do believe in this one, in Hosler's report, she mentions that a sort of explanation for the origins of the Goatman, which we'll get into that a little bit more as well. So what I heard about this theory, this is what I had known previously about the Maryland Goatman, is this origin story for him, which is that he comes from the Beltsville Agricultural Agricultural Research Center, or BARC. And this is a government facility that has been around for 114 years, since 1910, and they have many different research programs, still ongoing to this day. The idea for the Goatman, though, or the theory about the Goatman, is that he was a scientist that worked there, who got mutated in some way, either through an experiment or an accident or something. And I guess they turned him into just some test subject, I guess, at some point, or I don't know. But eventually he broke out and started terrorizing locals and attacking cars specifically. I don't know why that. And then, like I mentioned, Barry Pearson, the folklorist, or the professor of folklore, potentially. I didn't actually see that. They just called him a folklorist. But he's from the University of Maryland, like I said. And like I said, according to him, though, this was all popularized because of the death of a dog or a few different dogs, and locals had just blamed it on the Goatman. He also claims that students are the ones keeping that legend alive, and that they're the ones to make suggestions and stories about the Goatman attacking places like Lover's Lane, and just being, a monster flick kind of monster. Side note, I don't think I've ever lived in a town where there's a specific road called Lover's Lane. I don't think they're usually called Lover's Lane. That's just a colloquialism for it. And maybe I just didn't hang out with the people who did refer to it like that. I don't know. Oh well, I digress. I mean, the visage of the Goatman is, man, human from waist up, but waist down is the legs of a goat. And I didn't find if this has, horns like a satyr or a fawn would, but there's, of course, a connection there, at least visually from the story. He does claim, I believe Barry Pearson claims that it's an old story that began a long time ago. I didn't find an exact date. It could just be that old. But that does make sense given the other story I've heard about the Maryland Goatman besides his origins, which is, I can't remember it exactly, and I couldn't really find it, but I know where I heard it. It was in a podcast talking about it. It might even be in my book, actually, that I have, though. But the Maryland Goatman has an old story from a long time ago, and in that story, the stars, or whatever, the main characters are a couple who are newlyweds, and they had just finished their wedding, and they proceeded to get into their carriage and head on home to do their honeymoon. I don't know, whatever. But on that road, at some point they hit a snag, and the wheel had broken. Upon inspecting it, the husband realized, I can't fix this right now. I need to head back to town to get a replacement. And the wife was like, oh, we should go together so that I'm not, stranded out in the woods. And he was like, no, it's fine. You stay there. I'll go to town. It'll be fast. So he heads off, and then night falls. It was just like dusk before that, at that point, the evening. And now night has fallen. And the woman is in the carriage, just, waiting for her husband to come back and fix the wheel so that they can get home and begin their lives together. And she starts to hear some unsettling sounds, some grunts and sounds of feet dragging through the dirt. She begins to smell something rancid, like rotten, and she peers out the window. And looking back at her is the face of a goat on the body of a man. And she screams, as I think most people would, to be honest. And she screams, and I believe the goatman in the story is said to scream back and run away out of fear. He's far more goat-like in this story from what I remember. And then she eventually cowers and hides to avoid being seen by him again and to avoid encountering him again in general. And she just kind of lays there and eventually falls asleep. The next day, her husband still hasn't returned, so she decides to make her way to town and figure out what happened and where is he. And on that trek, she's walking down that road. She sees the evidence of the goat man dragging around and knocking about in the woods. And then she sees even more evidence of it, and she peers over to the side and sees the corpse of her husband on the side of the road, just strewn about. And that's where that story ends, to be honest, as far as I remember anyway. I believe that's where it ends. If I ever have a reason to talk about this figure again, I will, and I'll try to find the actual origins of that story. This is just something that I thought to do in the moment. So that ends the entry of the Goatman, at least one of the Goatmen, the Maryland Goatman. And so now we're on to Cold Bigfoot, the next entry. Cold Bigfoot, which is, of course, the Yeti. It's not really just Cold Bigfoot. I actually think the Yeti is a little more interesting because it has a bit more folklore to it as far as I'm aware. Maybe I just don't know about the Bigfoot folklore, though. Besides, him being a monster that rampages and kills people. But yeah, the Yeti has its origins in the folklore of the Himalayan mountain range, specifically Tibet, I believe. And the physical description is usually very similar to Bigfoot. A bipedal ape-like figure, which usually has brown or gray or white fur. And sightings of the Yeti are often explained as bear or yak, that people just confused for something more supernatural, I suppose. Interestingly, the word Yeti may mean rocky bear, or mountain bear, though I do believe that is contested somewhat, and we'll get into that a little bit. But if you're wondering about the term abominable snowman, that seems to have come from a misspelling of the name of another name for the creature, Metokangmi, which I could be mispronouncing that, but Metokangmi, Metoh-Kangmi, which translates as a man-bear snowman. And the reason abominable became used instead of man-bear, or something like that, is because Henry Newman was translating it, but he mistranslated Meto as filthy instead of man-bear. And so he thought filthy, or filthy snowman, just kind of sounded like a snowman that I guess had accrued some, exhaust from cars or something like that. So he replaced it with abominable for his artistic substitution, whatever. And I guess he thought that sounded better. I agree. I think it sounds better. Abominable snowman is nice. Alright, I like saying abominable, so. It's not really a word you hear too often. To the point where I think abominable is usually associated with the Yeti now, rather than being a word on its own. Somewhat interestingly to me, the Yeti may have once been interpreted as a god of the hunt by the pre-Buddhist inhabitants of the Himalayan region, at least from some research that I did or found, some stuff that I found. There's a religion in Tibet called Bon, or B-O with an umlaut over it, N, because again, I might be mispronouncing it. which at least at one point held the belief that the blood of the, I'm also going to butcher this probably, the Mi-Ergod, M-I-R-G-O-D, or wild man, could be used in certain ceremonies. When Tibetan Buddhism moved into the region, the Yeti was adopted into it, but it got a bit more of a different role, where it sort of became like helper or disciple to some religious figures in the region. And also in Tibet, Yetis are occasionally paraded around and worshipped as, like iconography of them is paraded around, and they're worshipped as like guardians against evil spirits. So there have been, of course, many different sightings and claims of evidence of the existence of Yetis since long ago. Most recently, that I could find at least, was in 2019, when an Indian Army mountaineering group proclaimed to have found some mysterious footprints. The footprints measured 81 by 38 centimeters or 32 by 15 inches. Of course, most of the proposed theories are, like I mentioned, bear or Yeti. A lot of the hoaxes, like whenever someone's proposed, like, I have fur of the Yeti, it's been usually a bear. Same with teeth, it's typically a bear, whenever they've been tested to see what they actually are. So this now we can get into like some of the etymology disputes, I suppose. A Japanese researcher named Nebuka in 2003 postulated that the word Yeti may be a corruption of the word Meti, which is a regional dialect term for bear. Nebuka claims that the ethnic Tibetans fear and worship the bear, but there are other researchers such as Dr. Raj Kumar Pandey, and they claim that this is kind of ridiculous to attribute all of the stories of the Yeti and whatnot to just being another term for a bear, just because the words kind of sound similar or they rhyme. So, but something that Nebuka mentioned there just kind of clicked in my brain, that it's just an interesting concept to me, that since I found out about it. The fear of the worship of the bear is an interesting concept to me, and it's not, of course, unique to the Himalayan region. And I mean, this is evident even today just by the term we used for that animal is bear. But that is not the true name of that animal. And you can see this by looking at other languages outside of Germanic origin. There might be other languages. I think Russian has a term for bear that's sort of like this euphemistic nickname, such as bear, which means like brown, supposedly. Again, I think that's contested as well. But yes, the actual name is probably something closer to like the Greek word, which is Arctos, which is where we get the English word Arctic. Could also be something closer to there's like a reconstruction for the Proto-Indo-European language, which could make this Arcas or Erkas. I could be mispronouncing those as well. But yes, bear is not the actual name for the animal, and was rather a euphemistic nickname given to the animal so that because ancient Germanic people did not want to summon the creature, and they believed that speaking its true name would summon it to them. Because bears are pretty scary, you know, especially if you're not living in modern society. I do wonder what the true name of it would have been to those people who originally coined the word that would eventually become bear. But like I said, it's probably something close to Arcas or Arctos or Arcus or Ercus. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm not an etymologist. I just think etymology is interesting. Anyway, tangent over. The other origins for the Yeti lie in the extinct giant ape species known as Gigantopithecus. So people believe that that's what they're seeing. But this is challenged because the Yeti is said to be bipedal, whereas Gigantopithecus is thought to have been quadrupedal, just based on, I guess, the bone structure. I'm not entirely sure on that. But an interesting tidbit about Gigantopithecus is that its living, or closest living relative, or ancestor, not ancestor, it is the ancestor. Its closest living relative is the orangutan. So they may have, I think usually whenever I've seen them depicted in media, they look similar to orangutans, but big. But yeah, I think Gigantopithecus is an interesting creature. But that's pretty much all I have on the Yeti, at least for the purposes of this. So the next entry is another one that I've talked about before on the podcast. the Mothman. So you probably know about the Mothman, but I'll go over it again just for the purposes of this. The basic story is basically that that was redundant. In Point Pleasant, West Virginia, some people driving around an old munitions plant known as the TNT area saw a shadowy flying figure with glowing red eyes. And for the next few days, people would keep seeing that figure every now and then and keep reporting it. Some people thought that it was just a giant bird, and they thought it was a sandhill crane, because I think they're common to that area. And this would ultimately culminate, or I think the sightings would cease after this, or as much at least, of the collapse of the Silver Bridge, which was a bridge in the area that connected West Virginia to Ohio. And this collapse resulted in the deaths of 46 people. And so, retroactively, through works such as The Mothman Prophecies by John Keel, the Mothman would be connected to this sort of, to this tragedy, and making him sort of a, harbinger type figure, something that, predates a tragic event so that he becomes an omen of that event. I'm trying to think of common words because I was going to say portent, but that's not exactly a common word. Some people theorize that the name the Mothman comes from a Batman villain known as Killer Moth, which came out around in the comics at that time. But I'm not entirely sure about that. It also may have just, the popularity of that may have just sort of fed into the idea of this being the Mothman and given him the moth attributes rather than, being like a Birdman or something like that. In 2016 as well, there was a photo taken that was claimed to be the Mothman, but a science writer named Sharon A. Hill looked at the photo and deduced that it was likely a bird, most likely an owl, that it was probably carrying a frog or a snake. And at first glance, looking at the photo myself, I can see why people, literally at first glance, I can see, immediately, I'm like, whoa, that looks like a human or a person flying with wings and weirdness. But as you look at it more, the shapes stop to make sense like that, and you're like, there's weird curves here, what's going on? And then as you start to make things out more, it really looks like it's an owl carrying a snake. I don't know why she said frog, unless the frog got long, but, yeah. Because the part of it that looks like it could be a leg at first glance of, the Mothman, when you really look at it, it looks like a snake, dangling behind in the wind. But yeah, that was a quick one. That's pretty much all there is to the Mothman. There's other sightings and other things. There's various games and stuff that he's appeared in, probably most famously in Fallout 76. If you wanna, I'm not sure what I've said about him in that, but I believe it's in Harbinger's video or episode. The next entry is another figure I think I've talked about, maybe not. I can't remember. It's another sort of UFO sighting-ish thing, potential alien. Some people, I think, don't think it's an alien, though. So yeah, I may have talked about this figure before, this next one, but it's the Flatwoods Monster from West Virginia as well. So you can find it in Fallout 76, and it says it's an alien. It kind of has, I guess it's thought to be an alien and has connections, of course, to UFOs, ufology, whatnot. I don't know if that's 100% always the case. So yeah, the Flatwoods Monster, or Braxy, as it's located in Braxton County. And I love it when they give, creatures like this names. Of course, there's Nessie for Loch Ness, Champy for Lake Champlain, and Braxy for Braxton County. I like that. But the basic story is that two brothers, Fred and Edward May, as well as their friend Tommy Heyer, were, just hanging out one night when they spotted a bright flying object in the sky. And being bored teens in 1952, they decided to follow it. And when they did, they spotted it crash landing into a local farm. I was going to say a local farmer's land, and I was like, I could stop at farm. They spotted it landing there, and they eventually went on to investigate, but they first went back to their mother's house. I assume that was their mother. Her name was Kathleen May. They went back there, told her their story, and I guess through her, or maybe their own doing, they got into contact with a few locals, including the farmer whose farm the object had landed on, and they went out to investigate. And upon finding the crash site, they spotted a glowing red light. One of them flashed their flashlight around to, see anything or get their bearings, I guess. And what they would see was a shadowy figure with a glowing red face and a pointed hood for, a head. They would also later claim that it had an ace of spades shaped face and claw-like hands. And so the most common explanation for this is that it was a meteor, because they also claimed that there was a pungent mist, which was not found when subsequent trips to the site were made. So the creature is thought to have been an owl, because of the descriptions given by them. Barn owls typically have almost like a hood-shaped head with an ace of spades face, and the red glow would have come from the meteor that was shining onto its white feathers or something like that. And talons, of course, could be mistaken for claw-like hands. But of course, Braxy still lives on in various media. Like I mentioned, it's in Fallout 76. I believe it's referenced in Majora's Mask, with a creature named Romani, or called Romani. And there's a golf game that I found that he's also referenced in. He's just kind of in the woods in the tree line there, just staring at you while you're golfing. He also lives on in the town's history, and there's a festival and memorabilia about him. And so that is all I have on Braxy. So now we're going to move on to the next topic, or the next entry, which is the one I didn't know anything about and I had never heard of before, which is the Loveland Frogman. But this one's really simple. It will only take a couple seconds, pretty much. This is the one that I think I could summarize in a sentence. Let's see how I can do this in as few words as possible. Frogman spotted, fear, cop find, frogman, kill, actually iguana. So basically, in 1972, in Loveland, Ohio, someone claimed to have seen a frogman, or the frogman. And by someone, I believe it was a police officer who claimed to have seen it. And another officer then investigated it based on that report, and eventually shot and killed what he believed to be the frogman. But upon inspection, he found that it was just a tailless iguana. In 2016, there was also a resurgence of this and a new claim about the Loveland Frogman, and that officer then came back to recount his report, I guess, on killing the iguana. A professor of folklore from the University of Cincinnati, Edgar Slotkin, has claimed that this story is actually pretty old. It's been passed down for decades, and it new reports come in predictable cycles. So it's not originally from 1972. It just gained popularity because of this incident. To end the entry positively, the Frogman in 2023 was named Loveland City's mascot and has been dressed as a frog prince in, I guess, some drawings that the town did. So the next one has something a little bit controversial in it. Kind of. Not exactly. I'm going to try to phrase this so that it makes more sense than how I wrote this. So the next entry is reptilians, which is kind of vague, but I assume what they mean is reptilian humanoids or lizard people who have infiltrated human society and can shapeshift to look like humans. And according to Michael Barkin, a professor from Syracuse University, he claims that this sort of idea of reptilian overlords that can shapeshift and whatnot comes from Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan the Barbarian. Specifically in the story The Shadow Kingdom. In that story there are snake men who can imitate humans and sort of take their form. But in their true forms, they have the bodies of humans with the heads of snakes. And in the 1940s, an occultist named Maurice Doreal wrote a pamphlet titled The Mysteries of the Gobi, in which he describes a serpent race with bodies like man and heads of snakes, and they have the ability to take on human form. These creatures are also described in Doreal's other poem, this one was said to be a pamphlet, so his poem, The Emerald Tablets, in which he refers to emerald tablets written by Thoth, the Egyptian god who's not an Egyptian god to Doreal, but rather an Atlantean priest king. I take some issues with this, which maybe I'll get into in another episode or something. TLDR, Atlantis is not real, never existed. It was a thought experiment created by Plato in his works called the Timaeus and the Critias, I believe. He did so to show how Athens was not great now, but it was great, and it could be great again if it followed these steps, basically. Not exactly, but basically. But yeah, that's basically all there is on Doriel. I mentioned that there's something kind of controversial with this. If you've been on the internet in the last 10 or so years, you've probably heard the idea of lizard people in the government. The idea of that, it takes this thing that I've talked about, which probably comes from Conan the Barbarian, but that theory about them taking over the government or being in the government already and starting some weird new world order comes from David Icke, a known anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist. And I'm basically just saying this so that you know that there is some problem with or that these things can be used in a way that is problematic, and just to be careful when you are researching some information like this. Be vigilant, I suppose. I don't know. It's also of note to mention that there are alien abduction claims that say that they were with these reptilian creatures. One of note is from Ashland, Nebraska, where an officer named Herbert Shermer went under hypnosis and recalled being on a UFO with beings who were there with him, with humanoid appearance with slight reptilian features, which is different from what we were talking about before, which is why I'm mentioning it separately. Another thing of note about these things is that they bore a winged serpent emblem on the left side of their chests. What this means, I have no clue. And now, we're on to the final entry in the iceberg. Slender Man. Picture this. You're back in 2012. Slender the 8 Pages is just released. Your friend is over there sitting on your computer playing it, recording a video, and he gets scared. Slender makes him poop. The origins of Slenderman go back to the Something Awful forums online, in which there is a Photoshop contest by Eric, or not by him. There was a Photoshop contest held in which Eric Knudsen created Slenderman for. He made a few different photoshopped images of typically depicting Slenderman with children or in the background of images around playgrounds and whatnot. And he I don't know if he actually won the contest, but his stood out because along with these images that he had made, he would include little blurbs and stories about the Slenderman from in-world people who were writing about him and stuff. So I'm sure you probably know what the Slenderman looks like, but just to give a description of what it was, or what it is. He is a very tall, slender man with a featureless white face, and often has tentacles. Sometimes he has arms that are tentacles, and sometimes he has many tentacles. And he's always wearing a black suit, sometimes with a red tie. But yeah, so that's what Slenderman is, and that's where he comes from. And there are, of course, many media references to him, such as the 2018 movie, or back in, I want to say 2012 again, when the Enderman was first introduced to Minecraft. But not everything is positive when it comes to the Slenderman. Sadly, in 2014, there were apparently a few different violent acts were committed in the name of Slenderman because some kids got it in their head that they needed to appease him. The most well-known of this is probably when a 12-year-old girl was lured out into the woods by her friends and was stabbed. A lot. I can't remember exactly how many times. Luckily, in that situation, Peyton is alive, the 12-year-old girl, and hopefully doing a lot better today. But besides that, there isn't a whole lot more to go into with Slenderman. I guess I could talk more about the games or the plot of the games. But yeah. And so ends the Tier 1 of the Humanoid Encounters Iceberg. I hope you enjoyed these entries. I'm gonna get to work on probably the 3rd episode of the Spellbound Soiree, which is my other podcast where I where I sort of present a fictional world and stories from the perspective of a radio host in a magical world. That is probably what I'm going to try and focus on next after I get this out. But I will also then work on the next tiers. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed your time aboard the Paranormal Express. Alas, we must part, for dawn approaches, and you do not want to be found by our dear conductor. If, though, you wish to have a permanent residency aboard the Paranormal Express, you can join our Patreon. I'm still figuring out what I want to do with that exactly. I want to make it worth it, obviously. My ideas right now is to basically maybe do uncut versions of the podcast, maybe just get some extra bits in there, potentially do live streams. You get access to the Discord, though I'm thinking I might just open that up to the public anyway. But yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. If you want to follow us elsewhere, or follow me elsewhere, you can find the podcast on Instagram at paranormal_express_podcast. And you can find myself on Instagram at feckin_undead. That's FECKIN_UNDEA dead. I look forward to when we meet again.